Hello, and welcome to the Simply Business Interview Podcast, a podcast created by business owners for business owners. I am your host, John Jennings. And I believe that most business owners are working way too hard for much too little. And one of our issues is that we overcomplexify things. I believe the answers are almost always within us or within our reach. I like to say that I'm a simple man with simple ideas. So welcome to Simply Business. Today, I am joined by Megan Williams, who is the COO of Meritrust Wealth Management. Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. Looking forward to hearing about your journey. Why don't you start by just telling us a little about your background and how you came to where you are today?
Sure. I'd love to, and thank you for having me. So I actually started in the industry 22 years ago, not knowing what I wanted to be. I had a plan in mind, thought I'd go into management consulting, and I graduated in 2002. So that wasn't a great time to be looking for a job, especially in management consulting. A friend of mine had just been laid off, and I was scrambling. So I interviewed everywhere you could possibly imagine. But this one company that I'd never heard of before. They were looking for kind of just general leadership skills. And suddenly I found myself working for the Vanguard Group out of Malvern, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And the best thing, they told me two things: we'll teach you everything you need to know, and we've never had a layoff before. And so those were magic words. And what I should have mentioned is that I was an English major. So at the time, my family, they were kind of scratching their heads and saying, "You don't even balance your checkbook. How are you going to work for a mutual fund company?"
Okay.
And probably 2 years into it, it finally clicked and took, and I loved what I was doing. It wasn't necessarily the technical side of the business at that time. It was more about the people because I was in a leadership development program. But over time, the love grew for the technical side of the business as well, and did some really exciting things there. Probably one of my proudest achievements was launching Personal Advisor Services, which was the first foray into technology-driven advice. And now everyone talks about how AI might be our biggest competition. But this was just AI enablement. And for Vanguard to give advice and to be able to do it with technology were two big shifts, but really exciting. And then we moved closer to family. So I ended my Vanguard career, shifted to Western Pennsylvania. So every trip has taken us a little farther west and now south. But I spent a few years at TIAA, where I got even more exposure to insurance products. And I'll never forget, when I was at Vanguard, my mom had asked me about annuities, and I had this horrible reaction, like, "No, they're terrible, and don't do it." But Vanguard had such a small part of the business doing that. And at TIAA, I learned the value of annuitization for certain clients, and for the value of giving even deeper investment advice and doing this full financial plan, something that Vanguard wasn't really doing at that time.
Right.
And worked with more CFPs, investment experts, and that's where I would say I fell in love with the business. So it was maybe 13, 14 years into it. From there, I was traveling a lot. So family is a big driver of this often, meant that I needed to look for a change so that I could be home and present for my kids. We had two kids at the time that I decided to make a shift, and went to work with an RIA, an advisory firm that was part of a CPA firm, still in the Pittsburgh market. And that just took this business to the next level for me. So I was able to see the value of having CPAs working with you side by side in client meetings. And taxes had been something that I've typically avoided. One, because it's just not fun. Like on the personal side, no one wants to write that check or go through that
Right.
process every year. And it was overwhelming. But having experts there to educate and show us really helped. Fast forward and ready for more challenges, but a lot of the leadership at the firm that I was at were still very young. And I came across this incredible opportunity where there was an advisory firm in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'd never been before, with that had been started by a woman. and it was part of a CPA firm. So very rarely do you find uh, women-led organizations in financial services, certainly not initiated by a woman. And I met the group here, loved the idea of what they could do. The scale was smaller. So that's the other thing. Throughout my
Hmm.
career, I've gone from 20,000 plus person organizations now to a 14-person team.
Okay.
And that path has been really fascinating. So I know that's a long way to tell you where I am now, but my family and I have been here for just about 18 months now, if not a little more. And we've already had exciting changes at Meritrust. So it
Yeah.
continues to be a journey.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that's interesting. So yeah, you alluded to it just then. So there's been some changes, which is uh, created some I guess I don't know turmoil or whatever, or just challenges or new opportunities.
New opportunities. You always want to
Yeah,
reframe, right?
absolutely.
Um, yeah. So I am someone who is inspired by and loves change, which I don't think is common. And it certainly came unexpectedly, but I'm doing my best to embrace it and to help the team embrace and lead through it. So unfortunately, you know, 6 months into my role here, we learned that the large regional CPA firm that we'd been a part of for so long was selling to a national firm. And that left a lot of questions, concerns, and we've had this beautiful partnership for 25 years, 24 at the time, but it was going to significantly shift who we were as a firm, the values that we espoused, the practices. So we have advisors who are experts in business transition and insurance,
Mhm.
or what we talked about annuities a second ago. An advisor who's really figured out income for clients in retirement. And annuities are sometimes a very important and appropriate part of her practice, but she wouldn't be able to leverage that if we had followed this other path. So we made the difficult decision to work on separating from that national firm and to go out on our own and to maintain our identity, the local leadership and ownership.
Mhm.
I think that was really important too. Now, this has been a regional, we live and work where our clients do sort of firm. So to take that to a national practice where people might not necessarily understand our market, our clients, who we are, what our priorities are, that was an important part of staying where we are. But we went from having the support of a 500-person organization now to figuring it all out on our own.
Right.
And that transition had started in November, December of last year and is continuing now.
Okay.
It's been a learning curve.
Yeah. So what obviously the local you mentioned, the local leadership, local values and things like that. What were some of the other things that really drove you to say, you know what, we need to form our own new beginning? Oh,
To be honest, one of the other driving factors behind that decision was the fact that this is a private equity backed transaction.
mhm.
And for anyone who's familiar with private equity, if you seek it out, you might be driving and choosing, the extent to which private equity invests or how they leverage your business. But this would have been something where we would have been giving up complete control to private equity. And at the end of the day, private equity cares about one thing. It's not
Right.
people, it's not clients, it's return on their investment. And no one felt comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Going back to values, nowhere in that methodology did that espouse the values of client first for us, and certainly not our team and employees, so many of whom have dedicated 20 plus years to this organization. So I just couldn't do that.
Great. That's inspiring, I think, for a lot of people who sit there and have to face these tough decisions. And I've sat in some of these conversations before where it's like, we don't like the way this is going, and boy, but it's a scary leap. So
Terrifying, truly, because you don't know what you don't know. And as I said, you've been relying on experts, whether it was human resources, marketing, technology, accounting, right?
Yeah.
someone else was doing all of that for us.
Right.
And we're not the experts, but we're figuring it out. And that's terrifying, exciting, depends on the day, but
Yeah.
I think we're thriving so far, knock wood.
Well, good. So what's been, I mean, you're what, well, I guess almost 6 months now, kind of into this journey of really launching out. So what's been a couple of the biggest surprises that have hit you?
This one might sound so silly, but probably one of the biggest surprises or challenges as an employer who cares about your people was trying to find healthcare coverage that was appropriate. We're not necessarily a young population, and being so small, I didn't expect that to throw us for as much of a loop as it did. So the amount of time that we had to invest in that, and thankfully we had human resources helping us do that search, that HR from the previous organization. But I was not expecting that, perhaps naively so, and that shocked the heck out of me. The
Hmm.
second was just the challenge that we have now is, who are we? Because for so long, our branding, our image was latched onto this larger firm. And people don't often recognize the Meritrust name, but they knew the bigger firm's name.
Yeah.
And so now the question is, who are we? We're not part of a CPA firm. The skills, the strengths that we brought to the table then continue to be the strengths and skills that we can bring to the table now. But are we finding new partners? The value proposition is still very strong. And so
Hmm.
we're thinking about, how do we maintain that, or do we change it? The competition in our business is changing rapidly, to everything from technology to specialization. And is this the time that we start to make that shift or not? And so I'm not going to say we're having a midlife crisis, but certainly, again, presents an opportunity to decide, do we pivot or do we capture what we've always been really good at and just figure out a new way to package and position that? And that might require new investments and different talent and doing more in-house than we ever did before. We don't know.
Yeah. Excellent. I appreciate you being so transparent and it's difficult times and you're still kind of this is different from some of the interviews I do, because a lot of the interviews I do, that people are past this initial phase and so they're actually trying to
Right.
recount it. You're living it like
We're
today.
in it. We're in it. I don't know if you've ever seen in one of the organizations I used to work for, they would talk about kind of the path to success. And it's never a straight ladder.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're the lattice. They would use this process where at some point in change, especially, you end up in the pit of despair.
Yeah.
You have to figure out, how do you climb your way out of that despair.
Yeah.
uh, I'm just refusing to accept despair, and to say that we can kind of be a little melancholy once in a while about what has happened,
Right.
but more than anything, you I talked before about going from really large organizations to really small organizations. The number of people who have to influence this decision, there are very few. And there's a lot of power in the ability to quickly change and to own that yourself
Yeah.
without thousands of people or hundreds or dozens of people being involved in that. And that's exciting. So I
Yeah.
keep just trying to hang on to that excitement and
Yeah. I
keep
like
us
that.
powering through.
I have a similar story. 25 years in large corporate IT. So companies like Yum Brands and LG&E, thousands of employees, hundreds of millions of employees with Yum. And then I go to work for a small company, I mean, decent size, probably comparable in size, revenue wise. I mean, we had about 60, 70 employees in the IT service sector, right?
Mhm.
And I remember the first week or two there, I was, VP of IT, and I'm being tasked with straightening up some network issues, and I brought in a consultant that I knew to look at it and give me some recommendations, and it was, I don't know, $10,000-15,000 worth of stuff, and so I go over to the VP of accounting, and I say, okay, I have have a solution for the networking problems. It's going to cost, whatever. What do I do to get approval for that? And she looked at me. She's like, "Aren't you the VP of IT?" I went, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, just order it or whatever." I said, "How do I order it?" She goes, "Just send it to me. We'll get it." But it was so freeing to like, oh, I
Right.
don't have to do a requisition. I don't have to get all this levels of approval. I mean, I had a multi-million-dollar budget, but $10,000 I would have had to get, approval for.
Absolutely. Throw together a project plan, demonstrate the ROI and the value. First
Yeah.
time I had that experience. And then they were like, well, just throw it on your credit card and we'll reimburse you. And I was like, this feels wrong. But at the same time, awesome.
It's liberating, isn't it? It's
Uh,
absolutely liberating. So that's cool. And I talked about the valley of despair with clients because there's that expectation of life's a straight line, and it's
yeah,
going like this. And the reality is it's down, it's up, it's this, and for anybody that's of course watching the video part of this, those anytime that line is below that straight line is what we call the valley of despair. It's when you think it's not happening at the rate, but in reality it averages out. But it's
right.
you have to deal with those valleys. So
Hmm.
what's like one of those challenges, one of those valleys that you're not going to be in despair over, but still you're going to have to ride your way through? What do you see on your horizon here if you're thinking about the future?
I think retaining and hiring talent in this transition period. So if people aren't comfortable with change or ambiguity like I am, and I think that's most people, especially if you aren't in charge of the decisions, it's hard for some people to sit in that discomfort for too long. And
Mm-hmm.
so keeping folks motivated and inspired and keeping hope alive, even though I can see the end result and what that could look like, not everyone else can. So how do I deliver that message and do so in an empowering way, in an encouraging way, so that we can retain the talent that we have today? And then for future talent, right now, we're not hiring a ton. We did just bring on a new team member, but I had that conversation of, I want you to understand where we are, that
Mm-hmm.
change is coming, that we're in the midst of it, more will come. And there's a lot of ambiguity. And if you're okay with that, then this will work out. But if not, we can't bring you on board right now. And you can't grow at scale, nor do you want to until you have your strategy really nailed down. But some roles just need to be filled. So that's if one thing is keeping me up right now, it's people
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, growing and maintaining.
Yeah, and most financial advisors that I'm familiar with that I've worked with tend to be high, like on disc. They tend to be high C's, which are typically risk averse. They want everything thought out and planned out. So I'm sure there's a percentage of the workforce, percentage of the population you're trying to reach that won't resonate with them.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a high D. I'm sure it's hard to tell just by talking to me.
I think you and I are probably pretty close. I'd say well, you got quite a bit of I in you too,
I
I
was going
think.
to say high D with a hint of I, depending on whenever I take the assessment, but it's almost always DI. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can sense that, which that's where I am too. So,
Nice.
uh, very good. Well, so let's just wrap up with. I like to ask some form of this question, which is, someone out there is maybe contemplating doing something like you are doing, which is separating from a bigger organization, or just starting an organization up, from scratch. What would be your top couple of tidbits of advice for them?
Oh man. So confidence and courage. Talking about being risk averse, I think women and young women in particular tend to be risk averse. It's very difficult to get women into sales positions or positions that require commission because there's no guarantee.
Right.
And 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, I don't know that I would have had the confidence to sit where I am now and to feel so good about where I think we could be. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that confidence came a little bit from courage,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit from just never stopping the learning process. every day. I expect to learn something new.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to just risk it a little bit and put yourself out there, but have the confidence in your competence. There, let's trademark that.
I like that. I
Right?
like that.
But yeah, I don't think you can do it without it. And gosh, beyond that, I mean, being okay with ambiguity because
Hmm.
you don't know what you don't know. And I will fully own when I'm learning something or don't know the answers. And in most cases, that has earned me a lot of grace with the team.
Oh
Learning
yeah.
payroll for the first time, we made mistakes, but people trusted that I would fix them.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot. It took some of the anxiety off of me through the learning process and just being transparent about what I knew or I could be good at and what I would need some help with.
Yeah. There's some research. I do a lot of work in the area of building trust as leaders, and 92% of employees would trust their leaders more if they just admitted when they didn't know something or when they made a mistake. And yeah, that's good that you're doing that. That's a great way of building that rapport with your team. Well, so just as we wrap up, if anybody out there would like, wow, I'd love to come work for them, or I'd like to work with a financial advisor like that, how can they find you all? How can they connect with you? Share that information if you
Yeah,
would.
absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn personally, Megan Williams, Meritrust Wealth Management. I should be easy to find. Our website is meritrustwm.com. And, as I said, despite the fact that we are in a lot of change right now, the advisors are marching forward, the clients are happy. And that's one thing I didn't even talk about. Is not once did we worry about the clients through this, because we knew that we excel at what we do. And at the end of the day, that's our clients. So hopefully, if someone is looking to become a client, they'll have no hesitation to jump on board with us now and kind of ride that high with us.
Yeah,
And same for prospective employees or anyone who just wants to connect. I'd love the opportunity to talk.
cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. This has been a really cool conversation. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, John. I have as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you liked it, please share or like it on whatever platform you use. You can find me on social media. On most platforms, I'm John K. Jennings. My first book is also available. Your Baby is Ugly tells you about 10 truths that business owners need to hear, but often won't, and how to overcome them. You can find it on Amazon. Just search for Your Baby is Ugly. And be watching for our next episode, where I'll interview another business owner who will share their stories and insights into what it's like to create a great business.